This is a carefully orchestrated video. Line of sight has to be perfect in order to gain the fullest amount of pleasure and knowledge. And so, I'm going to strip for you. Ha, gotcha. Stripping birch bark. And this is what I have so far. And this stuff is actually really pretty and fresh. A tree fell over the leafy teepee, and it happened that it fell during the right time of year. You typically can strip the bark off a tree cleanly without fighting it and having it rip if you do it in the month that begins with J, except for January. And this tree broke, and you might have seen it in that storytelling video, leaning against the leafy teepee and kind of hung up. And the interesting thing was that live trees strip easier than trees that have been just sitting around drying, and even though this was broken at the base, it was still alive. It was fully leafed out in the canopy, which is amazing. Lucky, lucky, lucky. Providence. Now, there's a couple native ways, native North American ways. Isn't this pretty? So fresh. No holes from bugs, so you can make a waterproof container. Couple native ways to do it. The one is just go to a standing tree, and you're not going to do anything more than carefully, with great knowledge and skill, knowing what you're doing, because you don't want to kill the tree just taking a strip of bark off to make your quill box. Let me demonstrate. This is the tree. You make, after testing the bark, a cut this way because the grain runs around. This is an odd kind of bark. Cut here, a cut here to stop it, and so you're ripping it along with the grain, and then make a longitudinal cut. And you cut it a certain depth, and you peel it a certain depth, so you're not getting into the living tissue of the tree, and it can recover, it can grow new bark. Not telling you to do that. So if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to girdle the tree. You're going to kill it. It's a skill. Enough disclaimer. The second method, which is interesting, and I can see it, traces on old white birch, paper birch, even yellow birch, is that they would come and they'd do the same thing before the sap is flowing, while the tree is still dormant. Test the bark, make sure it's going to peel off. Cut, and you can test it, you know how well it holds together and doesn't delaminate. Cut, a line down the center, walk away, just walk away. Because when that tree swells, it'll break that bark loose. And from what I understand, talking to some of the elders that I am aware of, they said that the woods would sound in the spring like people are shooting shotguns. Because when that bark lets loose, it lets loose with a bang. Bang, bang, bang. That's cool. I like that because you're working with the trees, you're working with the cycle of the trees, and it naturally comes off in a line that is favorable for that tree's further living. It would then not regrow this fine. I'm going to take this thing, this pretty white bark. It helps to make noises like that. But it would grow a bark over the wound that's more like another hardwood. It's almost like a mapley type bark. It's a different kind of bark. And so what I have this tree. And I have this motivation because I'm doing a class with 9 people Wednesday. And it seems like I can always put things off to the last minute. I should show you close up. And I trust in Providence. The luck of the forest. Because I wind up finding a tree, in this case, it was just dropped in my lap in the fire circle. That will supply enough bark for the class, and then some. Here's a few more pieces. Look at this. I am flush with bark. You see behind me, typically I'll cut it with my chainsaw. Near. Section it so I don't run the risk when I'm stripping it. It rips funny. I get nice straight things. And then I split it, stack it, and dry it. And so I've got firewood. So this is like a beautiful thing. Now I'm not going to cut this with my chainsaw into sections. I'm going to analyze it. And using my pocket saw, Lawrence and Roberto, I am going to deduce, I hope you can see this, where the line is. And I want to control the rip. So I'm going to go around here. So I'll have a gneiss, that's a geology joke, line for the bark. And you'll see when I remove it, it'll be removed at that line. This is musical interlude. Da 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 da. Stripper music. Da 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 da. Let's see where my line is. I'm a little off. That's okay. Got that. Now it's interesting. Some may doubt it, you don't want to cut yourself with your pocket knife, that there are legends of the birch tree and stories that go along with it. And these black marks represent the thunderbirds. This is the child of the thunderbird. And on the smaller thunderbirds, as is this one, pequeño thunderbird, that'll actually peel off of the bark. So you can get barky things with your thunderbird. You take out your ulu, which is, in my estimation, I've mounted it, the finest knife design in the world, because you can get stabby and unroll. And now I am going to get stabby and roll a direct line down here. You saw it here first. Making sure this tree is not going to survive, so I can cut it deep. Now the trick is peeling this off, because the grain of the bark runs around. It's like cherry bark. It's odd like that. Every other thing has the grain running fore and aft, but cherry bark and this likes to strip around this way. When you're stripping it off, you don't want it to start splitting, so I get two lines. I want to get one. It's a trick when you're making a long one for a canoe, a wigwaz jiman, birch bark canoe. And so you take a nice round stick and jam it in there lengthwise, a couple of them depending on the length, and that helps pry it so you don't get nice or bad splitting. Now I'm going to take my ulu and get this thing, jam it down and rotate it. You want to get that, even if you're going into that layer of cambodium, you want to be able to have control. A lot of times I'll do this, then I'll have to knock off the layer of wood. But the thing is, you want to loosen it up the whole length. The whole length. And then you work it. I'm actually into cambium. Dead tree doesn't matter. And then I have a favored orientation. This is thin, this is near the upper reaches of the tree, so it'd be better than a quill for a quill box. I want to be able to see it, so I'm going to do it this way. Get comfortable and start. Oftentimes letting the weight of the tree. Now I can see if I'm lifting up and separating the bark, because I'll see the bark in strips laying on the tree, and then in that case I'll just slice it so I don't goof it up. The neat thing about this is with a fresh tree you don't have the bug holes, and so you can make waterproof containers. Your waterproof macaque. It's lifting up a little bit. You're going to have to trust me on this one, and I'm going to shave it off and continue on. Being very careful. It's starting to lift off again. It delaminates like layers of paper. This is fun. More fun than one person is allowed to have in a lifetime. You want to roll it over my last in the Mohicans. Oh, it's starting to lift off in two places. That's all right. I was on it. I was paying attention. And there we go. This papery stuff delaminates, so I can just peel it off. I've done a lot of planter boxes with this stuff. And you can see that when you delaminate it, you get different colors, the inside, the outside. And so you can actually make like the scheme of stained glass. You can make scenes using these different colors. That is the mark of nice fresh bark. This is good fire starting stuff. My wife will use it for fairy housing. And so, it's rubbery, it's fresh, it's nice. The next step is to wash it with hot water to get as much resin out as possible, and that'll keep it from getting brittle over time. Wash it. This thing, I could make a waterproof container, easily. I would put it over the coals until it smokes, and when it gets to that point, you can bend it like rubber. There's a little bit of the wood, I'll just pull that off. You can bend it like rubber. And picture this. This is hard because I don't have it. You can try it with a piece of paper. You pinch these up. Pinch each corner. And you can cross grains on fresh bark when it's hot. And then you just bend it over and secure it with your awl and a couple things of split root. And you've got a watertight container. And all the seams are at the top. Picture a coffee filter. You stick it in the coffee filter container. All those little ridges are up near the top so it doesn't leak out and you get grounds in your coffee. The same theory. Good stuff. Few notes, few tricks on this. Now you notice, knees, it's tapered. And that means that when you get this base in here, you can jam it down there. That's wood. You can also stitch a birch bark base on there. We're using wood just because of the scope of the program. You don't need to get that perfectly measured because tapers, you jam it in there to a point, you've got excess bark, you can just cut it off and then sand it. And so that's how we do it. Let's see here. I used a little drill bit with a power drill to do those holes. And it leaves noticeable round holes in there. If I did it the native way, I would use an awl, a bone or what have you, and it basically just opens up the bark. After you stitch it, it closes back up. Closes up to a point. If you're doing small stitching, it's almost waterproof. And so we're going to do that using my bone awls. This thin strip up here, you picture it's hard to, like, you're weaving it through here, needle and thread, needle and artificial sinew, what have you, real sinew. It's hard to then fit it through these holes from the inside, especially when you can't reach it. There's a trick. Take a little loop of B50 or string or whatever you can, a little loop that's stiff enough to go through those holes. You open it up with a stick, so you look in there and you see a loop. You see a piece of thread or whatever tying material is sticking through there. What happens if you then take that end of the string that you want to come back out? What happens if you put it through that loop and then pull the loopy string out? It'll suck that string right through that hole. In that way you can work in small contained spaces as if you're doing a quiver. Now this is very fine stitching. I am an expert. I've had a lot of experience. And so my class is going to do wider stitching, a little less fine work, just so they can get that up there. Sweet grass around the rim, and you notice I did an artistic kind of bevel. Hot glued, Native American, ancient, tribal method, hot gluing a stick with lichen. And the nice thing is, if you bring it outside or get it wet, it'll remain alive. And then hot gluing some little hemlock cones there. It's hot gluing, not traditional. And then at the base, I took some bark. This is the inside of the bark, and then the outside of the bark I did like this little rim, and then took the inside of the bark again to make these little triangle-y things, just cutting a strip that has little triangle things with the grain running this way, wrapped it around there, and that is actually secured on with a little loop of split cedar root that I just jammed on there. Jamming things on is good. It's not a high stress outfit, people don't grab it and stuff, so that'll do it. This is so cool. I love this stuff. And I got so lucky. It's about 8.5 inches tall. Plenty of bark. Plenty of bark. I shall continue on my way. Let's nice. We don't have a busy day today. It's weird. It's Sunday. It's beautiful weather, but we don't have a lot of people, unlike yesterday. That's it. That is all. John signing off. Creek. Car parked right there. Well, that was graceful.